She was betrayed and fired. Her silent revenge shocked everyone. I was fired on a Tuesday afternoon by a woman who once borrowed my umbrella and never gave it back. By sunset, the company was clapping for her decisive leadership. By Friday, people would whisper a new phrase in the hallway, my phrase, about a quiet kind of revenge that doesn't shout, doesn't post, and never breaks a rule. It simply waits, gathers air, and blows the doors open, and wins very quietly. I've worked long enough to know when a smile is a warning sign. Lydia's smile was the kind you practice in a mirror, all teeth, no warmth. She arrived with a new title, Chief Strategy Officer, and a suitcase of buzzwords. She also had an idea about me, that I was legacy, which in our building was a soft word for replaceable. My job was boring to watch and vital to keep. Budgets, vendor histories, quiet patterns across years that told me when a department was bluffing or when a supplier would collapse. I could recite the company from the invoices alone. It wasn't glamorous, so most people ignored it. Lydia didn't. She began with compliments, the kind that feel like measuring tape. "You're the backbone," she said on her first walkthrough, sliding her gaze over my spreadsheets. "But we're going to modernize this. Make it faster than one person's intuition. Faster than one person's intuition." That was the first clue. She planned to build a machine that would look like me, act like me, and make me disposable. I trained her new hires because I train everyone. I've always believed you should leave places better than you found them, even if you weren't invited to stay. I turned my notes into plain English guides. I mapped risk flags in colors even a tired manager could understand. My desk became a help desk. 2 weeks later, Lydia started revising history. She presented my risk map as an early warning framework. She renamed my vendor tiers trust bands. She cut my name, then cut my chair from the weekly briefing. That's when the rumors began to sprout. The board wanted younger faces. The investors wanted speed. The culture wanted disruption. Still, I worked. I kept collecting small things. Duplicate invoices that smiled like twins. A driver who kept changing surnames. A contract clause that moved like a shadow every time someone printed it. I didn't announce it. I just saved everything in a folder named January Rain, because I always name folders after weather I can't control. The firing was clean. Human Resources prefers clean. They offered a script, and Lydia read it like a bedtime story for adults. "Restructuring," she said. "Transition," she said. "We appreciate your years," she added, glancing at her watch. Then she slid a white envelope across the table, as if pushing a boat into a cold lake. I didn't cry. I signed, stood, and thanked them for the chance to rest. Lydia blinked. People like Lydia don't know what to do with women who don't perform. My box was light. A framed photo of my son on his first day in a suit he hated. A coffee mug with a chipped lip. A tiny jade plant that had learned to survive fluorescent winters. I told the receptionist I'd be fine. I meant it, because while Lydia had been renaming my work, I'd been naming my exit. You don't need to raise your voice when the truth can speak on its own. You just need to find the right room. I went home and brewed tea. Then I opened January Rain. There it was, the patient pattern of someone laundering incompetence into bonuses. Not envelopes stuffed with cash, something uglier because it hides in plain sight. Soft contracts, off-cycle approvals. A consultancy that billed like a leaky faucet and always landed on Lydia's pet projects. I followed the drips back to the main pipe. If I tugged there, the walls would sing, but I didn't tug. I did something Lydia would never anticipate, nothing loud. Silence requires discipline. It also terrifies people who confuse motion with progress. I wrote a single, careful email to the person in our world who loves detail. The external auditor we rotated through every April. I asked if he would like a cup of tea, and a chat about a folder with a weather name. I didn't copy anyone. I didn't make a speech. I hit send and listened to the kettle settle. The next morning, I woke to his reply. Yes, one word can be a door. Before noon, he was at my kitchen table, smoothing the corners of the documents like a surgeon. He watched, then asked the kind of questions that make your spine feel seen. When he left, he said, "You've given me wind. Now let me find the storm." I nodded, because storms don't need applause. They need space. That afternoon, Lydia posted a photograph of herself beneath a banner about integrity. The comments clapped. I turned my phone face down and watered the jade plant. Then I wrote 3 lines in my notebook. 1, wait. 2, watch. 3, welcome the noise. You might be wondering if I wanted headlines, if I wanted to shout. No. I wanted the building to speak to itself, in its own official language, the kind stamped with logos and signatures. That kind of voice does not need me to perform. It needs me to be patient. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday again, the first tremor reached the hallway I no longer walked. The auditor requested a routine variance review. Lydia smiled for the request like it was a mirror. And then, somewhere behind the glass, something cracked. Before you scroll, tell me this. In my place, would you have gone quiet or gone public? Share your answer and pass this to someone who knows office politics. What did the audit team discover first? The leak I expected, or the one even I had missed? The first thing you learn after losing a job is how quiet your phone becomes. Then, if you were useful, it begins to hum again, but from unexpected places. My hum arrived as calendar invites I no longer received, forwarded by friends who still cared. Routine variance review, the subject said, as if routine were a blanket and not a rope. I made tea and waited like a lighthouse. In big companies, trouble does not sprint. It walks on soft shoes. The audit request looked harmless. A sample of vendor invoices from 3 quarters, a set of approvals, and the list of project codes Lydia loved to mention in town halls. She called them quick wins. I had another name for them. Shortcuts with frosting. By Wednesday, the auditors asked for more samples. A whisper turned into a choir. Finance saw duplicate purchase orders fixed at midnight. Legal asked why a consultancy changed addresses but kept one phone. IT flagged edits from a login that belonged to a man who left last year. Lydia smiled through it all. She was excellent at smiling. She perked up in glass rooms, wrote on whiteboards in friendly loops, and said the word alignment until it lost meaning. When the auditors requested a reconciliation schedule, she thanked them for their thoroughness. Praise is a good perfume. It covers many things until the room gets hot. I did not celebrate. I folded laundry, went for walks, and called my sister. I answered no questions I was not asked. Silence does not mean absence. It means you are saving your voice for the right moment. On Thursday, my old desk neighbor sent a message. Your weather folder. Was there any storm you didn't name? I told her I had named the biggest one after a month. January rain. She typed a single heart and a raindrop. People like us speak in small, steady symbols. The auditors kept pulling threads. Approvals clustered on Fridays after 4, when half the building traveled. Change orders on Lydia's pet projects moved faster than emergency fixes. A vendor's invoices looked like a deck of cards, same numbers, different order. Now the building began to talk. Not with statements, but through calendars and elevator voices when certain names came up. In the cafeteria, doors held longer. People once dazzled by Lydia's polish started asking simple questions. Why the rush? Who benefits if this stays fuzzy? When did we stop checking the second signature? If you have ever watched a company find its conscience, you know it's a quiet event. No music plays. There is only the click of small locks opening in people's minds. The first concrete anomaly the auditors documented was a mileage claim pattern tied to a consultant who seemed to travel more than weather itself. The receipts were too neat. The routes were illogical. They backtracked and overlapped like someone tracing a maze without lifting a pen. It was not theft in the Wild West sense. It was something worse. The soft belief that rules are for others. Next came a benign training contract that triggered déjà vu. The document looked freshly written yet carried a date from 2 years ago. The template matched a newer format. It is little tells like that which separate noise from music. The team requested the original file. The owner said it was lost when a laptop reset itself. Machines are honest. Humans blame them when cornered. Meanwhile, Lydia staged normalcy like a stage manager. She recorded a video message about momentum and trust. She posted a group selfie with the caption, "Proud of this team." I recognized 3 faces doing the math behind their smiles. You can't act your way through arithmetic forever. At home, I adjusted to small freedoms. Eating lunch without a calendar, washing mugs without a sink queue, wearing sweaters no policy approved. I also kept notes. The habit is bone deep. Each night I wrote one sentence about patience. On Friday I wrote, "The river does not argue with the rocks. It goes around them and keeps going." By week's end, the auditors requested 6 months of access logs, the black box after a crash. They show who touched what and when, and who stood nearby pretending not to look. The request added a surprise. The onboarding file for a junior analyst Lydia fast-tracked. He had a perfect resume and the wrong supervisor history. Sometimes the most dangerous signature looks legitimate. I did not wake early to watch the building. The building was watching itself. But friends sent small notes. "We're being asked for original copies. Do you remember the old vendor scoring sheet? Where did that rule about emergency approvals come from?" Every note was a light flicking on in a long hallway. Notes kept arriving like small birds at my windowsill. A policy draft here, a forgotten checklist there, a calendar ping from last spring. Each one said the same thing. "Wake up, we remember now." You might think I hated Lydia. I did not. Hate burns too fast, and I needed a long flame. What I felt was older, a refusal to be erased by someone who loved mirrors more than work. I had met versions of her before. Some learned, some left. Some were promoted to rooms where their reflection finally bored them. On Monday, an email went to a small group. It found me anyway. It invited Lydia to a short meeting with compliance and the external team. The room number told me everything. It was the room with no coffee, where outcomes are written before the door closes. I watered the jade plant and sat by the window. There is a sound the world makes when people who thought they were invisible step under a proper light. It is not loud. It is the sound a zipper makes when it finally closes, neat and certain. Before you go, tell me this. Have you ever seen small lies snowball at work? Share your story in the comments and pass this to someone who might recognize the pattern. In that short meeting, would Lydia talk her way through the heat, or would a document speak louder and change the room? The short meeting began on a gray morning. Gray is honest. I was not in the room. But I have sat in enough like it to know the script. People arrive confident, pour charm like syrup, and call the mess a misunderstanding that new words can smooth. Numbers are not polite. They don't nod. They just stand. A friend texted me. She opened with a joke. That meant Lydia felt cornered. Jokes are small shields. They clang when the arrows start. The auditors spoke in soft voices. They began with mileage claims. "Help us understand the routes," an auditor said, pointing to a map with lines like tangled thread. Lydia blamed a travel app. Then they showed screenshots with timestamps that did not match the invoices. The room cooled. Lydia tried another pivot. "These were handled by my team." Another folder slid open. Every claim had her approval. The first hairline crack ran across the table. They moved to the training contract that looked older than its template. "Where is the original file?" Compliance asked. Lydia blamed a laptop that reset itself. It had mirrored the drive. The true original showed a different date, a different scope, and a different rate. Someone had layered a new face over an old bone. My phone buzzed again. She's talking faster. That meant the room had grown heavier than her smile. The auditors asked about the junior analyst she fast-tracked. His onboarding file had perfect numbers and missing years. The references existed, but the timeline did not. Then came the signature. I knew this would hurt. On a change order, the approving signature belonged to a director who was on medical leave in another country on the date shown. The pen stroke looked right, but the metadata told a different story, and the access log whispered a name that did not match the ink. The room hushed. Forgery is not a small word, even when you say it softly. The third crack widened into a fissure. While this unfolded, I cleaned my kitchen drawers the way you do after a flood. I thought about the day I trained Lydia's hires and how I labeled everything in plain English. I made the work easy to watch and easy to repeat. Sometimes the thing that saves you later is the thing that cost you your chair. By midday, compliance asked Lydia to step out so they could discuss next steps. That phrase means the next step is already chosen. She sat in the waiting area, back straight, phone bright, fingers still. After 18 minutes, they called her back and handed her a list. Access suspended. Laptop surrendered. Badge returned pending review. No one raised a voice. You might ask where my anger went. It burned down to a coal long ago. I keep it for warmth, not for cooking anyone. This is not about revenge as spectacle. It is about correcting the story for honest workers. Late afternoon, my old desk neighbor called from a quiet stairwell. There's another folder, she whispered. Hidden inside a neutral name, Q1 Draft Ideas. Inside were spreadsheets with 2 sets of totals. One set matched our systems. The other matched someone's wishes. The difference was not random. The auditors compared formulas and found a tiny function altered to skip every 3rd row. It made gaps that looked like rounding. It was simple, sneaky, and it turned losses into wins. That night, I sat with my jade plant and wrote, Grace is when truth arrives without gloating. I slept well, not because someone else was hurting, but because the company might stop rewarding performance that only looks like work. The older I get, the less I care about shine. I care about solid. Morning brought a notice to department heads, a pause on payments for 3 projects, a review of vendor ties, and a reminder to keep all records intact. People read the memo twice and felt the floor tilt under them. It finally felt real. Utterly. It said what everyone already knew. The water was higher than the floor. People who once said, that's above my pay grade, began to send in their pieces. A receptionist remembered a courier who always came late on Fridays. A manager found a temporary policy with no expiry date. A junior analyst admitted he had been told to copy numbers from a draft marked illustrative. None of it would win headlines on its own. Together, it drew a shape you could not ignore. I made oatmeal and remembered a year when I ignored a doubt because a senior person told me to be a team player. I went home sick with myself and fixed it the next day. The memory felt like a hand on my shoulder. It said, this is why you chose silence. You wanted the process to be the hero, not you. By noon, the board scheduled an emergency session. The invite list grew to include legal counsel and 2 outside directors who smile rarely. Lydia was still pending review, which meant people spoke of her in the past tense by accident. Her allies began to migrate toward phrases like, I had concerns, which they had never voiced. A chorus can learn a new song quickly when the conductor changes. Before sunset, I got one more message from the friend near the room with no coffee. They found approvals that point upward. She didn't name the person. She didn't need to. In companies like ours, gravity is real. Things roll downhill, and signatures pile at the top. If the next name was who I suspected, the story I started would not end with Lydia. It would climb a floor and knock on a door that had never been knocked on. Before you go, tell me this. When you spot the first crack, which red flag scares you most? Dates, signatures, or sudden titles? Share below, and pass this to someone who trusts the small details. The auditors had one more folder to open, and the signature on its cover was not Lydia's. Would the next name change everything? The trouble did not climb by numbers alone. It climbed on friendships. Companies pretend to be machines, but they are crowds of favors wearing badges. When the auditors stepped back from columns, faces appeared. A training vendor with a glossy website shared an address with a catering firm handling executive off-sites. The catering owner was Lydia's cousin. On paper, they were strangers. In photos from a summer retreat, they laughed under tents at the same table. I've lived long enough to know how soft power travels. It does not march. It drifts hand to hand as a recommendation, an introduction, a private joke. If no one writes it down, you can always call it coincidence. The auditors began to collect the coincidences. They mapped travel claims to the days our board chair hosted golf. The rounds happened on Thursdays, always business development. On those days, Lydia's projects received rush approvals signed by a senior vice president who adored the game and owed the chair a favor from years back. Kindness is lovely when it leans toward integrity. It turns heavy when it becomes debt. An assistant admitted she had been told to book the Thursday block without questions. Her calendar told the truth. Tea time, late email, approval by dinner. Money did not pass at those tables. Permission did, the kind that lets people stop asking. I made soup and kept reading. Every few pages, my phone hummed with a thread found in an old rug. Do you remember the temporary policy? My friend asked. I did. It was a slim document pushed through during a busy period to unclog approvals. It allowed any executive sponsor to greenlight budget changes up to a limit for 60 days. No one set the end date. 60 days grew legs and walked a year. Policies are like doors. If you leave one propped open, you eventually learn who walked through. The auditors traced dozens of changes to that open door. Most were small. A few were bold. The bold ones blossomed on Lydia's portfolio. They didn't always break rules. They leaned hard on an unlocked hinge, then called speed a virtue. I thought about the times I accepted a shortcut because someone I trusted offered it. Those memories make me gentler, but not blind. Our building had blinked with one eye closed for a long time. The auditors used a phrase I liked: pattern adjacency. The dots don't touch, yet they sit close enough to know whose hand placed them. Vendor A is fine. Vendor B is fine. Vendor C is a cousin. B and C take turns on change orders, and A quotes high so the others look fair. No single deal shocks you. The river floods only when you step back and see the bank. A junior manager, brave in a quiet way, said she'd been told to route a contract to the faster approver. She did it once, felt sick, and never again. Her note to compliance was simple: we need to go back to the second signature. I wanted to frame that. We all need second signatures: a friend, a pause, a breath before we leap. By midweek, the auditors asked for every document with tracked changes off. That is where footprints hide. They restored versions and found edits that softened risk scores. A moderate became a low. A watch became review next quarter. The edits came from accounts owned by senior people far from the daily work. It was like finding fingerprints on a window high above the ground. The board met twice. The first time they whispered. The second time they spoke. Someone finally asked, "Who invited this culture?" That question is a mirror. No one likes to look. You don't leave rooms like that feeling victorious. You leave thirsty. Lydia's allies began to soften. One by one, they shifted their praise into context. The vice president with the golf calendar resigned for personal reasons. The cousin's catering firm took down retreat pictures. The training vendor paused services to ensure alignment. Words were arranged like furniture to make the room look tidy after storm. Through it all, I kept my vow. No grandstanding. When the auditors called, I answered in plain sentences. I didn't predict. I confirmed. Each time I felt the urge to gloat, I watered my jade plant. It didn't need more sun. It needed care. Then the auditors found a new hidden folder, not the one with 2 totals. Once you knew where to look, that trick unraveled itself. This one was quieter. It lived inside a presentation template labeled Brand Concepts. The slides were blank. The attachments were not. Behind the template sat schedules with code names that matched the summer retreats. Each schedule aligned to exceptions approved the following Friday. It was a ledger of intent disguised as design. Those codes led to a mailbox used for drafts. The drafts weren't drafts. They were instructions written in soft language. Let's position vendor B for this cycle. Let's streamline by bypassing the wait. Let's align training outcomes with leadership priorities. I could hear Lydia's cadence, but one message carried a tone above hers. The sign-off included a first initial that belonged to exactly one person in our tower. I looked at a sky the color of clean paper and tried to imagine the conversation when someone asked him about those notes. Would he call it guidance? Would he claim vision? Vision is wonderful when it helps people see. It is ruinous when it blinds. Before you go, would you confront a friend you like if the facts say they crossed a line? Tell me what you would do. And pass this to someone you trust to tell you the truth when it's hard. The Brand Concepts folder pointed to a sender above Lydia. When the auditors opened that mailbox in the room with no coffee, whose voice would they hear first? And would it pull the story up another floor? They chose the room at the end of the corridor. The one without a machine humming in the corner, and without the mercy of mugs. I have sat in that room before. When an organization wants clarity more than comfort, it removes sugar. In that room, chairs don't swivel, windows don't open, and sentences must carry their own weight. I was not there, but the story reached me in short messages. Lydia arrived 5 minutes early, badge still warm from the turnstile. She carried a notebook and a pen that clicked like a metronome. The auditors sat with folders stacked like bricks. Compliance led the session with a script: expectations, scope, intent. Legal watched the door. When all nodded, the brick on top opened. Mileage came first. Routes looped like a child's drawing. Times overlapped like two clocks out of sync. Lydia began with gratitude and drifted toward speed. She said she valued efficiency. The maps disagreed. The auditors were kind and unyielding. They used verbs like show and demonstrate. They asked Lydia to turn to tabs marked in orange, then compared the orange tabs to emails printed in blue. The blues and oranges did not like each other. A claim marked urgent matched a photo of a laughing group under umbrellas at a leadership day. Rain on the lawn, plastic cups in hands. Not fraud by itself, but not whether a company should pay for either. Next came the training contract with modern bones and an antique face. Lydia said she trusted her team. The auditors agreed that trust is lovely, then pointed to the log that recorded her edit after midnight. The change was small, a hidden field, a rate that crept upward like ivy. She said she corrected an error. The earlier draft showed no error to correct. Silence made a fresh paragraph. They moved to the junior analyst with the glossy resume. Lydia called him promising. The team called him missing. 2 years that should have shown employers were labeled consulting. No invoices. No references that could answer a direct question. When asked who interviewed him, Lydia said we. When asked which we, she named a manager who was overseas. The chair creaked. Chairs always tell the truth. My friend in the room typed, "She is revising." The auditors returned to the change orders. They had found the small function that skipped every third row. Lydia said it must have been a template error. IT restored a version from 3 months earlier in which the function did not exist. The pen clicked again. Clicks sound louder in rooms like that. At home, I made toast, though I wasn't hungry, and told myself to sit still. The urge to pace is a kind of fear. Patience is heavier. I watched the street. Somewhere uptown, a room with no coffee was lifting its eyes to the next page. They opened the brand concepts shell and showed the schedules that matched Friday approvals. Lydia said she was aligning resources. The auditors asked who told her to align them in that pattern. She said leadership wanted momentum. They asked who in leadership. She gave a first initial, then a surname. The air shifted. A name like that changes gravity. Legal asked Lydia to step outside. She left her notebook on the table, then stepped back and took it with her. While she waited, the team compared notes. The mailbox that sent the soft instructions had rules that forwarded replies to a private folder labeled archive. The word did not mean history. It meant hide. When she returned, they asked her to explain the rules. She said she was preserving clarity. The rules had been created before she joined. The date told a different story. That afternoon, while the meeting paused for 15 minutes that felt like winter, compliance drafted a temporary control. All non-essential payments halted on 3 high-velocity projects, effective at once. The instruction went to finance, and the screen in my friend's lap lit up. For a moment, she forgot to breathe, then sent me one word. Frozen. I did not cheer. I washed the plate. I watered the jade plant and pinched 2 brown leaves that were not keeping up. You remove what can't stay so that the rest can live. Good controls are not punishment. They are care. Word of the freeze traveled like weather. Dry throats. Busy printers. Managers who had nodded at buzzwords picked up their old pens and asked basic questions out loud. Who did the review? Where is the second signature? What changed since last year? Teams who had felt invisible sent summaries of the steps they follow when no one watches. Their notes were steady and patient and clear. When the dust settled, the best sentences were the simplest. In the same hour, Lydia was asked to surrender her laptop and badge. Pending review, they said, which is the corporate way to say, the bridge is closed until we inspect the beams. She asked to speak to the board chair. She was told to provide any statement through counsel. She smoothed her hair. She stood up. She sat down. She looked at the pen as if it would offer a new script. Pens obey hands, not wishes. People later asked me if I felt vindicated. The word is too grand. What I felt was relief, like when a fever breaks. The company had remembered its own language. It had chosen to watch itself with clear eyes. That is all I wanted. Before you go, tell me, when pressure rises in a meeting, do you talk fast or go silent? Share your answer, and pass this to someone who has stood in a room where truth had to hold its own. With payments frozen and access cut, the board called an emergency session. Would the next question stop at Lydia, or would a larger signature finally step into the light? The day after the freeze, the city felt rinsed. Rain polished the streets, and the air smelled like coins. I walked without hurrying. My body still carried old alarms, but my mind had set them down. People think the loudest moments change us. I have learned it is the quiet ones. The pause before a reply. The breath where you choose between pride and patience. Those are the minutes that build a life. Why did I go silent instead of raising a banner? Years ago I chose noise. I was new, eager, and right about a risk. I sent a sharp memo and won 3 nods and 1 enemy I did not need. The fix was made, but the bruise lasted. I apologized to the manager I had embarrassed. He said gently, "When the house is at risk, do not burn the porch to show you saw smoke." I wrote that line inside my notebook. Since then, I have practiced a slower courage. It is not passive. It is focused. You collect dates. You keep originals. You do not treat suspicion like proof. You do not confuse gossip with evidence. You ask calm questions and accept clear answers. You wait until the people whose job is to check can watch the steps with you. It sounds dull. It is the only way I know to keep good people safe while bad habits die. Quiet timing shapes stronger outcomes. I made a promise to my younger self one night at a bus stop after a long shift. I held a leaking umbrella and a warm paper bag of dinner. I told myself I would not trade my peace to win a moment. I would protect my sleep, my name, and anyone junior who might take the blast meant for someone else. It is a small vow. It has weight. So when Lydia trimmed my credit, and then my chair, I did what my vow required. I opened January Rain and wrote one careful invitation to the auditor. I did not post a word. I did not leak a sentence. I kept faith with the patient tools that protect the honest many from the showy few. This is not sainthood. It is maintenance. While the building examined itself, I tended small things. I cleaned my cupboards. I patched a sleeve. I called my son. He described a problem at work that sounded like a small echo of mine. "Do I push?" he asked. "Do I wait?" I told him. Ask for the rule to be followed. Ask twice in writing. If the rule is wrong, ask for it to be changed in daylight. Do not make yourself the rule. The auditors sent polite questions on 3 afternoons. I answered in the same tone. I attached what they asked for and nothing else. Each note ended with thanks, which is still the best closing I know. I slept. I did not watch for headlines. I am too old to feed on drama. Peace tastes better. Memories arrived while I waited. Some were kind. Some were corrective. I remembered the time I let a supplier skip a form because his mother was ill, and he looked exhausted. It felt human. 6 months later, the invoice trail stumbled. He apologized, and we fixed it. I learned then that mercy without records is not mercy. It tempts people to drift. Now, when I am kind, I write it down. By midweek, the freeze had done its work. People stopped speeding because the road was closed. Real plans, not slides, began to appear. I saw minutes from meetings where managers mapped how work should move when no one is rushing. They put back second signatures. They reinstalled waiting periods. They apologized to teams who had carried loads without thanks. I read those minutes and felt at home in a place I had left. Power hates still water. It wants current and spray. It wants to look necessary. When you stop the motion, you learn who was swimming and who was splashing. The freeze showed us that. In the quiet, real swimmers surfaced. They were not the loudest. They were the ones with lists and checkboxes and patience for dull tasks that keep a company clean. On Thursday morning, I went to the market for bread and green apples. The clerk asked about my week. I said it had been full of paperwork and peace. She smiled. "Paperwork and peace," she said. "That sounds like adulthood," I laughed. It also sounded like a life I could keep. The year I turned 50, I promised I would not let other people's chaos set my calendar. This week was my test. I passed by doing less. That afternoon, another note reached me. The board had expanded the scope and invited 2 outside directors to ask hard questions without politeness. They wanted a clean timeline of who knew what and when. They wanted to know why the temporary policy never ended. They wanted to see the mailbox rules. They wanted to understand the voice behind the soft instructions. That last part mattered. If leadership culture is a song, they were finally reading the lyrics. At dusk, I looked at the building across the river. Its glass held the sky like a held breath. I remembered every season I watched it glow late on quarter ends and dim in August heat. A city is a record of choices. So is a company. So is a person. You can change direction at any hour if you are willing to say the old road was wrong. Before you move on, share one lesson timing taught you. Did waiting help you, or did it cost you? Write one line below, and pass this to someone who wrestles with patience. As evening fell, the board scheduled an emergency session for the morning. With legal on one side and the auditors on the other, would the questions stop at process? Or would a name above Lydia finally be spoken aloud? The morning of the emergency session began with a kind of hush that felt like snow, even though the sky was clear. I woke before the alarm, made tea, and stood by the window while the city stretched. Somewhere across the river, our boardroom lights came on in a line, then steadied like a heartbeat. They gathered with folders and measured faces. The auditors sat to one side, compliance to the other, legal at the end like a keeper of doors. I was not in the room, but I have lived long enough inside companies to hear their language through walls. When truth takes a chair, it moves the air. That morning, the air learned a new shape. The first announcement arrived as a memo with the subject line, Interim Controls and Financial Update. It looked ordinary. It was not. The company would restate certain figures for the last 2 quarters. Bonuses tied to those metrics were paused. Project spend over a threshold would need an extra sign-off until further notice. It read like housekeeping. It sounded like confession. For honest teams, it felt like water after dust. For others, it felt like the floor had shifted a few inches to the left. People tell you crisis is loud. Sometimes it is. More often, it is a silence that roars. The cafeteria was quiet, but forks clicked. Hallways were clear, but elevators lingered as if they sensed a crowd just out of sight. Slack channels slowed to careful sentences. Even the building's revolving doors turned with less swagger. When a company chooses to correct itself, everyone walks a little softer. By noon, Lydia's status changed from pending review to administrative leave. The phrasing was neat and neutral, the way institutions speak when they are done with adjectives. Her calendar went blank in a blink. Her photograph vanished from the intranet banner. Allies who once tagged her under inspiration began to post links about integrity, as if they could backdate their spines. I did not clap or curse. Compliance released a second note, this one shorter and heavier. Preserve originals. Discontinue use of draft mailboxes for approvals. All exceptions require written rationale and second authorization. I could have written it myself. It was the old, steady song, humming again after too much noise. People who prefer the hard, quiet work felt taller by an inch. People who love glamour wrote fewer sentences and chose their verbs with care. Legal delivered letters to a small group inviting them to interviews under counsel. A few faces turned gray in the hallway. I felt no thrill. Accountability is not a feast. It is medicine. You take the dose, you drink water, you rest, and you promise to stop doing what made you sick. The outside directors asked their hardest question at 3. What did our culture reward? It is a simple sentence with teeth. When a company is honest, the answers are useful. When it is not, the answers become slogans. That day, the answers were quiet and true. We had rewarded speed dressed as vision, polish dressed as leadership, and exceptions dressed as strategy. We had clapped for momentum and forgotten to ask where it was going. In the pause that followed, someone proposed a change that made me smile in my kitchen. They would restore the old vendor scoring sheet and publish every exception monthly, names included. Sunlight is not gentle, but it is fair. When processes live in daylight, ambition learns to mind its manners. By early evening, an internal bulletin acknowledged the restatement and thanked teams who raised concerns with professionalism. My name wasn't there, and it didn't need to be. 6 people had stepped forward with pieces only they could hold. A receptionist with a memory for faces, an assistant who saved calendars, a junior manager who said no the second time. The story belonged to them as much as to me. Near sunset, the city softened. I walked to the river and watched the light change on the glass. My phone buzzed once more. It was a message from someone I did not expect. A board liaison with a calm profile picture and a reputation for not wasting words. The note was brief, an invitation to meet with the audit team in a formal session the next morning. Your perspective would be helpful, it said. The building had chosen to speak with me in its official voice. I stood for a long minute, with wind lifting the edge of my sleeve, and thought about the first day I saw Lydia enter with her ring light smile. I thought about all the women I have known who did twice the work for half the glory, and kept receipts because they learned they must. I thought about my son, who likes to fix small machines on weekends, and how he holds each piece to the light until it clicks. Repair is a form of love, so is refusing to look away. I went home, set my notebook on the table, and sharpened a pencil. I made a list: dates, documents, what I saw, what I did not see, what I think I know, what I will not guess. In the margin I wrote, facts first, feelings later. Then I added a line to steady myself. Be specific, be kind, be done. I breathed and kept my balance slowly there. Before you move on, tell me this. Have you ever watched an organization grow quiet before it changed? What did the silence say where you work? Share one line below and send this to someone who believes real progress doesn't need a drum. The invitation was clear and official. Tomorrow I would sit with the auditors, not as the woman who was fired, but as the woman with the map. When I opened January rain in that room, would the next discrepancy point only at Lydia? Or would a higher signature finally be named aloud? The next morning, I dressed as if I were visiting an old friend I once trusted but no longer admired. The mirror asked nothing. I answered anyway. Be calm, be clear. Be brief. The sky outside was crisp, almost ceremonial. When I arrived at the building, the guard blinked twice before recognizing me. He smiled, then looked away quickly, the way people do when they want to show respect without taking sides. The meeting room had changed little. Same soft lights, same hum from the ceiling vent, same table polished to denial. The difference was the air. It carried an alert stillness, like a choir waiting for the first note. The auditors stood as I entered. Compliance nodded. Legal offered water. I declined coffee. That felt fitting. I placed the jade plant's smallest leaf, pressed in wax paper, inside my notebook. A quiet reminder. Survive the light. They began politely. They always do. Thank you for coming, Ms. I interrupted gently. Just grace, please. They smiled, grateful for the ease. The questions started broad, when I first noticed anomalies, what patterns drew my eye, how I managed data. I spoke in plain language, the way I always wish leaders would. Money doesn't vanish, I said. It takes the path of least resistance. Find the easy path, and you'll find the problem. I handed over my printout of January rain, each sheet numbered, annotated only when necessary. The lead auditor, a man whose patience looked like stone, scanned the pages. He asked why I had kept them. Habit, I said. It's easier to stay honest when you keep evidence even for your own mistakes. He nodded, and I watched the note he wrote. Integrity rooted in discipline. It felt like a small redemption for all the nights I doubted whether silence was courage or cowardice. They moved through dates and approvals. I confirmed Lydia's access changes, the weekend logins, the pattern that skipped every third row. Each answer felt less like accusation and more like cleaning, slow, steady, necessary. When they reached the brand concepts folder, the tone shifted. The documents were already printed, but they wanted context. Who could create the forwarding rules? Who could approve exceptions that high? I explained the hierarchy, the permissions, the quiet hierarchy of yeses hidden beneath job titles. Then came the page with the signature, one I had suspected but never named aloud. The initials matched the email sign-off Lydia had whispered in the last meeting. The senior vice president, the CEO's oldest confidant, the man whose voice shaped budgets like clay. The auditor tapped the page lightly. Do you know this signature? I breathed once, steady. I know the style. I also know he was not in the country that week. Legal paused their pens. Compliance looked at the clock. The auditor didn't smile. He simply turned to a new sheet and drew a line beneath the signature. Noted, he said. It was a soft word, but it carried the sound of something final beginning. For an hour we walked through history, contracts, policies, retreats. I spoke of culture without naming names, of how charm had replaced caution, how compliments had become currency. They listened. Occasionally one of them wrote a phrase I liked. Speed as camouflage, friendship as policy, silence as evidence. It felt less like testimony and more like translation. turning years of instinct into sentences the system could understand. When it ended, they thanked me, and the lead auditor said quietly, "We may need to reference you again when this proceeds further." I nodded. "Use whatever helps the truth stand." Then he added, "Few people leave clean trails. You did." I didn't know whether to smile or apologize, so I just said, "It's easier when you don't take shortcuts." Outside, the corridor smelled faintly of paper and sanitizer. The company felt smaller, as if the walls had pulled inward around the truth. In the lobby, I met a few colleagues by accident. One whispered, "It's really happening, isn't it?" I said, "It's always been happening. We're just watching it now." On the sidewalk, sunlight hit my face like forgiveness. I sat on a bench across the street and watched employees flow in and out. No panic, just a new rhythm. Emails carried facts instead of flattery. Meetings ran shorter. People who never spoke in town halls were now being asked for advice. Repair had begun. That evening, I received an email from the auditors thanking me formally. Attached was a confidentiality clause, standard procedure, but the last line made me pause. "We recognize the personal integrity that informed your actions, and thank you for your discretion." For once, official language felt human. I poured a small glass of wine, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. I wrote, "Sometimes the loudest revenge is a company correcting itself." I underlined company twice, because I meant the people, not the brand. Healing is slow, but it's honest. Before I closed the notebook, I added a note to my future self. "If ever you doubt the value of restraint, remember today's room, the one you chose to enter with facts, not fury." Then I closed the cover and let the city lights fill the silence. "Before you go, tell me this. When faced with injustice, would you rather fight loudly or fix quietly?" Comment your way and share this with someone who believes calm can still be powerful. As the auditors left with their folders sealed, one turned back and said, "Grace, we'll likely need you again. There's one last signature we're tracing." The next morning, whose name would that final trail reveal, and how high would it reach? The final trail began with a missing comma. It sat in a contract no one would question, a renewal for a vendor everyone liked. I noticed it months ago, the way you notice a picture frame a touch crooked. The comma changed nothing legal, but it betrayed a new editor, a hand that didn't know our old style. When the auditor said there was one last signature to trace, I knew the frame. Morning came clean and bright. I took the long way to the cafe and opened my notebook. I promised myself 2 things. I would not gloat, and I would tell only what I knew. The city felt lighter, as if it had dropped a bag it didn't need. At 10, the auditor called. "Grace," he said, "we have confirmation." He named the senior vice president, the CEO's oldest confidant. He said the mailbox rules behind the soft instructions traced back to the SVP's account. He had hidden the path in plain sight. Clear at last, I did not gasp. It was the name I expected and hoped I was wrong about. Good people sometimes work beside power and forget to check the soil under their shoes. I asked what would happen next. "We're scheduling interviews," he said, "and the board will meet with outside counsel this afternoon." He paused, then added, "Thank you for your discipline." Discipline felt like such an old word. It is also the only bridge I trust. At noon, the building shifted color. Screens dimmed, conversations shortened, and calendars rearranged like birds before a storm. A discreet notice went out. SVP operations will step back during an independent review. The sentence carried more weight than it admitted. People read it twice, then looked at the ceiling. I walked by the river and thought about the years that taught me to keep evidence. The mornings I came early to finish the math. The way I tucked questions into my sleeve until I could ask them in daylight. I also thought about the cost of staying quiet. The lonely lunches, the promotions that never came, the times I smiled at praise meant for politics. You can love a place and still hold it accountable. In fact, love demands that. Before dusk, my phone buzzed with a new address and a time. Not the room with no coffee. A different room, smaller, with a circle of chairs. I understood. This would not be interrogation. This would be a curtain call, final. I arrived with my notebook and a steady breath. 3 board members sat with counsel and the lead auditor. They did not ask me to retell the story. They asked what repair should look like. I felt a tenderness then, the kind that comes when adults ask other adults to help them do the hard thing well. Start with sunlight, I said. Publish exceptions each month. Restore second signatures. Close the temporary door that never closed. Protect the people who tell you the boring truth. And stop praising speed for its own sake. Ask where it is going. The oldest director smiled like someone who recognized a song from long ago. They asked if I wanted to return. The question had edges I could feel. My pride wanted to say no. My peace wanted to say maybe. I asked for what would make either choice honest. A written apology for the restructuring. A fresh title with real work. And autonomy to rebuild controls for the teams who keep the lights on while others chase spotlights. They did not promise. They said they would consider it after the vote and council's findings. That was fair. On my way out, I passed a wall of framed photos. In one, Lydia stood near the SVP, laughing under silver balloons. I did not feel triumph. I felt relief for the younger version of me who once needed applause. She learned better. By evening, the company posted a message about leadership transitions and renewed commitment to governance. Words are scaffolding. Deeds are the building. Still, the scaffolding mattered to staff trying to understand their morning. My old desk neighbor sent a photo of her screen, the vendor scoring sheet, back in use, with boxes that would not be charmed. "We're breathing again," she wrote. I sent a heart and the word steady. At home, I cooked simple food and ate without checking my phone. Then I wrote a letter I never thought I would write, to the CEO. Not to scold, not to praise. To state plainly what I believed. That a company is people agreeing to do right by one another. That culture is a habit. That speed without scrutiny is vanity. And that trust is earned by small, repeated choices. I ended with a wish for his courage. If he had any sense, he would know courage is quiet like that. The next morning, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside, a formal apology for the way my exit was handled, an offer to consult on controls for 6 months with autonomy, and a line that made me set the paper down and breathe. Thank you for choosing repair over spectacle. I smiled at the wording. It matched the life I have been trying to build. I stood by the window with my jade plant and thought about going back. Not forever, but long enough to help good people work without fear. I also thought about walking away, taking my notebooks and my piece to a new place that might need them. Both choices felt honest. Before you go, tell me, if you were me, would you go back with new terms, or walk away for good? Comment your choice, and share this with someone choosing between pride and peace. Your view might help someone decide today. Truly. I slept with the offer on the table in the city, breathing softly. In the morning I would answer, what will I choose? And what final truth will close this story for good? I woke before dawn and watched the city hold its breath. I could not hide behind maybe any longer. The letter on my table waited like a quiet guest, polite and patient, not the kind that pushes. I poured hot water over tea leaves and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who wanted applause loud enough to drown out doubt. She was kind, but she was tired. I thanked her and let her rest. By 7, I had decided. It was not a dramatic decision. No soundtrack, no mirror speech, no heroic pose. I would say yes to the 6-month consulting offer, with the autonomy promised in writing, and the authority to rebuild the honest gears that keep a company clean. Not to rescue anyone, not to prove anything, to finish the repair I had started and hand it back steadier than I found it. I walked to the office with my notebook and calm in my chest. The guard nodded. The lobby smelled like paper and lemon. In the conference room, the lead auditor and 2 directors waited with legal. We signed what needed signing. 3 pillars: sunlight, second signatures, and slow where slow is wise. I asked for one more thing: training for managers and assistants on basic controls and courage. I also asked for simple training for managers, assistants, and new hires on basic controls, plain language ethics, and how to say no without fear. We agreed to publish a 1-page guide, to be kept on every desk and taught to every newcomer. My first day back began with listening. I visited the teams who do the quiet work: payables, procurement, travel, records. I told them 2 truths. You are the backbone, and we will not ask you to sprint uphill and call it a parade. Shoulders lowered. A young analyst asked if promotions would now credit accuracy, not charm. It will mean what you make it mean, I said. Accuracy with courage. Courage with kindness. We reopened the vendor scoring sheet and cleared clutter around good rules. We closed the temporary policy and wrote sunsets for future exceptions. We removed mailbox rules that turned drafts into orders. We built a simple dashboard that showed where speed was hiding and who benefited when it did. It wasn't fancy. It was clear. Culture shifted in the questions people asked. Less, how do I get this through? And more, whose eyes should see this first? On Friday, I met the CEO. He looked older than his portraits. Leadership ages the face when it avoids the mirror. He thanked me for returning. I told him what I tell my son. Real authority is the power to stop yourself. He said, we will own the restatement. We will earn our way back. I said, start by paying the debt you owe to the people who stayed honest while others ran. He promised to begin there, slowly and publicly. Lydia resigned that afternoon. A short note, careful and correct. I felt no victory, only relief. I wish for her a life where the mirror is kinder and the work is real. The senior vice president separated the next week with fewer words. The company made no celebration, only changes. That is the right order. At home, I watered my jade plant and called my sister. We did not talk about headlines. We talked about dinner and a Sunday movie. Peace is not loud. It is scheduled. Later, my son asked if saying yes had cost me anything. A little pride, I said, and a few evenings. But pride grows back slower than trust, and trust is what I wanted. He sent a heart and a wrench, love and repair. Months turned steady. The freeze thawed in steps. Exceptions shrank. Meetings shortened. A mailroom clerk thanked me for fixing something I had never seen, the chaos of unlabeled boxes. He was proud of his new system. I told him that is what winning looks like. Clean labels, clear paths, honest weight. He laughed and said I make boring sound beautiful. I said boring builds bridges while sparkle builds slides. On my last day, I walked the halls and touched the edges of a life I had lived and helped mend. People stopped me with small stories. A form made simpler, a vendor fairly scored, a budget approved with eyes open. None of it would trend, all of it would last. At my old desk, my neighbor left a gift. A tiny dish the color of rain with a paper slip inside. Wait. Watch. Welcome. I returned my badge. The guard looked at me with gentle pride. Outside, the river was blue glass. I felt light, not because I had won against anyone, but because I had won for something. Dignity, process, the quiet rightness of work done well. At home, I wrote one last page in my notebook. I thanked rooms that taught me patience, days that taught me repair, and people who chose daylight. Then I wrote a sentence for anyone betrayed or fired or forgotten. You are not the title on your door or the chair you keep warm. You are the choices you repeat when no one is watching. That is where your revenge lives, inside the life you keep clean until the moment the truth needs a witness. Before you leave, please tell me one thing in the comments. Who taught you your strongest lesson about integrity, and what did they do that you still carry? Share this with someone who needs a quiet win today. It might reach them at the hour they almost give up. The story is finished. I am done performing. The building will keep walking on its own legs now. The jade plant lives in a brighter window. My umbrella is still missing, but I have learned to check the weather and carry a spare. When the kettle sings, I will answer. When the truth knocks, I will open the door, steady and unafraid.